So the third letter family, but the fourth calligraphy clip in Gothic book script, Gothic textura or Gothic black letter, is that based on the letter O. And the letter O consists of 4 strokes, one, two, three, four, as you can see, and it's important not to start this first stroke too far up. If you start the first stroke too far up, and I haven't done it enough, so let me start it here on the line for X height, you'll see that immediately the letter is too tall. So it needs to start below the line for X height, stops below the lower line for X height, and that means that you can get that stroke. And your aim is to get really nice straight ends at 45 degrees, which is the nib angle, and keep quite close in if that is your pattern. So the letter C is exactly the same, but it doesn't have that 4th stroke. And you can turn the nib onto the left, as I showed you in the second calligraphy clip, onto the left-hand tip of the nib like that. While there's ink still there, just pull it down. It doesn't need to be exaggerated. It doesn't need to be curved. It's simply almost like a controlled flick so that it's like that. The letter E is like a letter C, like the first part of the letter O, but the stroke that finishes a letter E goes upwards because very often this would be joined on to the next letter. Now the important thing to remember about the letter E is that the bowl is the closed bit, needs to be tight. It needs to be short. Where you start that letter needs to be above halfway. And if you do that above halfway, then you won't get an ugly bowl, which, let me just do that again so you can see, this really is not a letter that you will be proud of. Look, no, we don't like that. So keep that bowl tight in there. So you can see that stroke is above halfway. The letter Q is based on the letter O, which is why it's in this family, and it simply goes down. Now what you can do is to do a little flick at the bottom. There's your flick. And if you're not very comfortable about the 2-story letter A, you can make a more open letter A. The 2-story letter A is at the end of these series of letter families, and it is a slightly complicated letter. But if you're not very comfortable with that, you can just do a simple letter A like this. You can see it's based on the letter Q. And the letters G and D I've left to the end because they are slightly more complicated. So the letter G comes down to this point, and then you need to remember you've got to get all this stuff in 2 nib widths, so it needs to be tight and held in. That's a lot to get in to that tiny space. Let me do it again. So it is just like the letter O, which is why it's in this family, comes down to here and then tight in to there. Now at this point you might want to put a little ear on the letter G like that, because that often is what happens to this letter in medieval manuscripts. But you can see sometimes that almost comes by default. The letter D, as it is in so many calligraphy styles, is a tricky letter, because you've got to get that diagonal stroke so it matches and it fits. Now, if you start too far over, that stroke becomes so dominant. If you don't start over enough, the letter looks slightly weird. So the letter needs to, that stroke needs to start. You can imagine a line going up there at that point, and then it won't look as though it's falling over one way or another. And it is, like all the other letters in this style, quite a narrow letter.